Odysseus. Debunking the myths. Who was he? A liar and an egoist. Why was he considered a hero? Odysseus returned home alone. That sentence sounds almost like a triumphant ending. After 20 years away, after war, storms, monsters, and the wrath of the gods, a man finally sets foot on the shore of his native Ithaca. His wife, his son, his home, and his royal power are waiting for him. He has lost years, but preserved what mattered most, himself and his name. But the men who set out with him never returned, not one of them. In the Iliad, Odysseus appears as more than a cunning warrior. He is an experienced leader and diplomat, a man capable of stopping panic, persuading those who hesitate, and finding a solution when brute force no longer works. It is his intelligence that helps the Greeks bring the Trojan War to an end. Yet, in the Odyssey, the outcome of his leadership looks far less heroic. The fleet is destroyed, the ships are lost, his companions are dead, and the commander himself reaches home alone. Of course, this does not automatically mean that Odysseus killed them. His men made mistakes of their own. They broke prohibitions, distrusted their king, and gave in to fear and greed. The forces of nature, monsters, and gods all worked against them. It would be far too convenient to place all the responsibility on one man. But it would be just as convenient to absolve him completely. Odysseus made decisions. He chose routes, concealed dangers, entered conflicts, and sometimes took risks not to save anyone, but out of curiosity, for plunder, or for the sake of his own name. At some point, an uncomfortable question arises. Where does the hero's tragic fate end, and where does the price of his character begin? Another clarification is necessary. We are not investigating the biography of a historically verified king. We have no reliable evidence that this particular Odysseus ever existed. What stands before us is, first and foremost, a hero of the epic tradition, a figure created and repeatedly reinterpreted by storytellers. So we will judge not a real person, but the actions the text attributes to him. And that judgment must not begin with a predetermined verdict. It is far too easy to declare Odysseus either a flawless hero or a self-obsessed liar who sacrificed everyone in order to return home. Both versions are suspiciously simple. So from this point on, we will be interested in more than cyclopes, sorceresses, and sea monsters. The question now is not what adventures Odysseus survived, but what price others paid for his return. Before accusing Odysseus, we need to understand why he was considered a hero in the first place. Otherwise, we will quietly replace one question with another. Instead of examining an ancient story, we will test its protagonist against rules that did not yet exist in his world. Today, a hero is usually someone defined by a moral act. A hero protects the weak, sacrifices himself, and chooses justice even when it works against his own interests. Victory by itself proves nothing anymore. A person can win and still remain a villain. The Homeric world works differently. An ancient Greek hero did not have to be kind, honest, or merciful in the modern sense. He was usually a person of noble birth, endowed with exceptional qualities, and capable of accomplishing what most people could not. He defended his honor, increased his glory, defeated his enemies, and preserved his power and his household. His actions might inspire horror, yet their sheer scale still set him apart from ordinary people. This does not mean that the ancient Greeks could not distinguish good from evil. They could. Their moral system simply placed the emphasis elsewhere. Honor, status, loyalty to one's household, and the laws of hospitality carried enormous weight. A guest was under the host's protection, but the guest was also forbidden to abuse that protection. Violating this order was not treated as a minor breach of manners, but as a dangerous assault on the structure of the world. This will matter later, when Odysseus reaches Ithaca and discovers that the suitors have turned his palace into the site of an endless feast. But Odysseus's heroism differs even from that of the other Achaeans. Achilles is almost unstoppable in battle. His strength is open, furious, and terrifying. Ajax represents military power and directness. Heroes like these confront danger face to face. Odysseus acts differently. He is rarely the strongest man in the room, but he is often the man who understands the room better than anyone else. The Greek concept used to describe this quality is metis. Practical, flexible, inventive intelligence. Not the abstract wisdom of a philosopher, but the ability to assess danger instantly, conceal a plan, change roles, and make circumstances work in your favor. Where Achilles wins with a blow, Odysseus wins with a design. This matters because Odysseus is the king of small Ithaca, not the ruler of a vast and wealthy state. He cannot constantly rely on superior numbers, limitless wealth, or the reputation of an invincible warrior. Intelligence becomes his greatest resource. He knows how to persuade, pretend, endure humiliation, and wait for the right moment. In a heroic world obsessed with visible strength, this is an unusual form of power. And here the first serious problem appears. Practical intelligence is almost impossible to separate from deception. To conceal an intention, one has to lie. To play a role, one must make someone else believe in an invented reality. To defeat a stronger opponent, it may be necessary to violate expectations and rules. That is why Odysseus's lies cannot be declared either a vice or a virtue in advance. Their purpose, cost, and consequences matter. It is one thing to deceive an enemy in order to save lives. It is another to hide the truth from people who have entrusted you with their lives. And it is something else entirely to endanger others merely to prove your superiority once again. The ancients called Odysseus a hero, not because they considered him morally flawless. They admired a man who could endure, prevail, and recover what he had lost by using intelligence as a weapon. But a weapon does not become good merely because a hero wields it. We can now turn to the most obvious accusation and examine where Odysseus's cunning genuinely saved lives, and where it became a habit of controlling people through lies. We have already established that cunning is not an incidental addition to Odysseus's strength. It is his primary way of acting. Now we need to look more closely at what lies beneath that attractive word. Cunning quickly becomes lying, and in Odysseus's hands, lying becomes a fully developed instrument of power. He does not merely give someone false information. He constructs an entire version of reality for the person before him, plans his own role, and calculates the other person's reaction in advance. While everyone else makes decisions inside the picture he has created, Odysseus remains the only one who knows what is actually happening. That is what gives him control. Significantly, he begins lying even before the Trojan War. According to later ancient tradition, when men come to summon Odysseus to the campaign, he pretends to be insane. He yokes different animals to a plow and acts as though he is sowing salt in a field. The calculation is obvious. A madman cannot be considered a reliable warrior, so he will be left on Ithaca. The deception is exposed by a cruel but effective test. The infant Telemachus is placed in front of the plow. Odysseus immediately turns aside to avoid killing his son, and thereby reveals himself. This episode does not appear in the Homeric poems. It belongs to a later layer of the myth. But it matters to the history of the character. Odysseus is not deceiving an enemy or a monster. He is trying to evade a collective campaign and preserve his own life, family, and kingdom. Even here, his lie serves a personal interest. Later, the same talent will serve the entire Greek army. The Trojan horse is perhaps the most famous military deception in European culture. Force had failed to destroy Troy for years, so victory finally came through a plan built on a false impression. The Greeks appeared to have sailed away. The enormous horse appeared to have been left as a gift. The war appeared to be over. The Trojans themselves brought the instrument of their destruction inside the city. In the Odyssey, the horse is celebrated in song as an event already famous, and tradition firmly associates the plan with Odysseus. Here, the narrative is not ashamed of deception. On the contrary, it admires it. The lie is justified by its result. It ends a war that thousands of warriors could not bring to an end. But the clearest example of Odyssean cunning appears in the cave of Polyphemus. Trapped by the Cyclops, Odysseus realizes that they cannot simply kill the owner of the cave. The men cannot move the huge stone at the entrance. If they kill the monster, they will also destroy their own path to freedom. So the hero acts in stages. He gets Polyphemus drunk on wine, calls himself nobody, blinds him, and waits. When the other Cyclopes come running at his cries, they ask who is hurting him. Polyphemus answers, "Nobody." His neighbors decide that there is nothing to intervene in and leave. A single invented name becomes a trap that works without any further action from Odysseus. He does not defeat the Cyclopes by force. He makes them misjudge what is happening. This is a lie told for survival. Perhaps the most justified lie in the entire story of Odysseus. And then the hero nearly destroys the result of his own brilliant plan. Once the ship has reached what seems a safe distance, he cannot restrain himself and begins mocking the blinded Polyphemus. His companions beg him to stop. Odysseus refuses to listen and reveals his real name. Now the Cyclops knows whom to curse, and he appeals to his father, Poseidon. Why identify yourself after the deception has already saved your life? There is no practical need. Odysseus needs the victory to belong specifically to him. A nameless man outwitted Polyphemus, but glory can belong only to someone whose name is known. The hero trades safety for recognition. This episode shows, with exceptional clarity, how closely his greatness and his weakness stand beside one another. First, he saves his men by giving up his name. Minutes later, he endangers them because he cannot bear the thought of a nameless triumph. After his return to Ithaca, lying acquires a different function. Now Odysseus is hiding not from a monster, but from his own household. Athena changes his appearance, turning the king into an old beggar, and the hero begins telling invented life stories. He fabricates origins, journeys, and misfortunes, weaving plausible details together so skillfully that his listener cannot see the boundary between fact and fiction. Odysseus deceives the loyal swineherd Eumaeus. He does not reveal himself to Penelope. He tests the servants. Even when he meets his elderly father, he initially continues the game, hurting him with a story about how Odysseus had once been his guest. Only when he sees Laertes' despair does the hero finally reveal himself. Immediate danger can no longer explain all of this. Caution is genuinely necessary. The palace has been occupied by the suitors, and revealing himself too soon could cost him his life. Yet Odysseus continues testing people, even when he has sufficient reason to trust them. He wants not merely to learn the truth, but to obtain it while remaining hidden. He wants to see what others feel without showing his own hand. It is no accident that Athena feels a special affinity for him. Their encounters carry an almost professional sense of recognition. The goddess conceals her appearance and intentions as easily as her favorite does. She admires not Odysseus's moral purity, but his ability to keep a plan to himself. Their alliance is founded on a similarity of minds. Calling Odysseus a pathological liar would therefore be crude and inaccurate. We are not assigning a medical diagnosis to a literary character. Moreover, his lies are almost always organized and purposeful. He understands whom he is deceiving, why he is doing it, and what result he wants to achieve. But neither can every deception be justified by necessity. Sometimes a lie saves lives. Sometimes it wins a war. Sometimes it protects a household. And sometimes it allows Odysseus to preserve psychological superiority over someone who does not even know that he is being tested. This is precisely why his greatest virtue becomes a moral problem. Odysseus knows how to create stories inside which other people make the decisions he needs them to make. The danger begins when he accepts his own central story as truth, that returning home justifies every lie, every risk, and every price. The accusation now becomes more serious. Lies can be judged in different ways. One saves lives, another creates an advantage, and a third serves vanity. But dead companions are no longer a question of reputation. Odysseus was their leader, which means he was responsible not only for his intentions, but also for the consequences of his decisions. At the same time, it would be unfair to judge him by the outcome alone. A commander does not become a murderer every time he loses men. We need to establish something else. Could he foresee the danger? Was there a safer alternative? And did he tell his companions the truth about the risk? The first ordeal after sailing from Troy comes in the land of the Cicones. Odysseus's men seize the city, kill the men, take plunder, and begin to feast. Odysseus himself recognizes the danger and demands that they leave at once. His companions refuse. While they celebrate, the Cicones gather reinforcements and launch a counterattack. In this episode, the crew's guilt is clear. Odysseus warned them, and they disobeyed. But the first warning sign appears. The leader's command no longer has force. He can devise the most complex military stratagem, yet he cannot make his own men leave a captured shore in time. Leadership is not only the ability to see danger, it is also the ability to ensure that a decision is carried out. The cave of Polyphemus is different. Odysseus does not need to enter it in order to survive or replenish supplies. His companions suggest taking the cheese and animals, then returning immediately to the ship. He refuses. He wants to meet the owner of the cave and receive the guest gift owed to him. Within Greek custom, expecting a gift is not absurd. Hospitality was sacred. But Odysseus is in an unknown land and does not know whether its inhabitants recognize human laws. He risks everyone for curiosity, plunder, and confirmation of his own status. By the time Polyphemus appears, the opportunity to leave has been lost. The deception that follows saves the surviving men. Revealing his name, however, exposes them to danger once again. Odysseus hears his companions beg him to be silent, yet he chooses glory. Here, then, both foresight and a safer alternative are present. He understands the risk, he can avoid it, and he continues anyway. Polyphemus's curse becomes the cause of Poseidon's anger. In the world of epic, this is not a figure of speech. A god can truly wreck ships, delay a homecoming, and alter human fate. Odysseus could not foresee the entire chain of events, but he took the first step knowingly. He won the encounter, then failed to stop. The next revealing episode is Aeolus's bag. The Lord of the Winds gives Odysseus a favorable breeze and seals all the others inside a leather bag. Ithaca is already in sight. Odysseus falls asleep, exhausted from having steered the ship himself without rest. His companions decide that the bag contains gold and silver their commander does not want to share. They open it, the winds burst free, and the ships are driven back. The immediate fault lies with the crew. They break the prohibition out of envy and greed. But the reason for their distrust also matters. The men can imagine that their king has secretly kept treasure for himself. Odysseus never told them what was inside. He kept the information to himself, as he always does, and the crew filled the resulting vacuum with suspicion. This is how broken trust works. A leader assumes that an order should be enough, while his followers begin to see deception even where none exists. In the land of the Laestrygonians, almost the entire fleet enters a sheltered harbor. Only Odysseus leaves his own ship outside, mooring it to a rock. When the giants attack and rain stones down on the ships, the vessels inside are trapped. Only Odysseus and the men beside him manage to escape. This can be seen as an act of brilliant caution. He recognized the dangerous shape of the harbor and refused to follow the others inside. But the episode also permits a more troubling question. If Odysseus suspected a trap, why did the rest of the fleet enter? The text does not give us enough information for a confident accusation. The honest conclusion must therefore be limited. Odysseus prudently saved his own ship, but his caution did not protect the men under his command. On Circe's island, the situation changes again. The sorceress turns some of the companions into pigs. Odysseus forces her to restore their human form, after which the travelers remain with her for an entire year. The danger is over, the tables are full, and the commander himself seems to lose his sense of urgency. It is his companions who must remind him of home. This is not yet a betrayal of the crew. The men are resting after what they have endured and recovering their strength. Yet the year-long delay shows that returning to Ithaca does not always rule Odysseus as completely as he later suggests. Sometimes comfort is quite capable of silencing his great purpose. The most difficult decision still lies ahead, the passage between Scylla and Charybdis. Circe warns him that if the ship draws near Scylla, the monster will seize 6 men. Trying to fight her will only increase the losses. The other route passes Charybdis and threatens the destruction of the entire vessel. Odysseus chooses the lesser evil. As a calculation, the decision is reasonable: 6 victims instead of the loss of the entire crew. But he tells his men nothing. They row without knowing that their leader has already accepted their possible deaths as part of the plan. One may object that the truth would have caused panic and made the passage impossible. That is a powerful argument. A commander may sometimes have to conceal information if revealing it would create an even greater danger. But the moral weight remains. Odysseus preserves control of the ship by depriving his companions of the chance to understand what they are entering. He chooses for them, then watches as Scylla carries 6 away. Finally, there is the island of Helios. The prohibition could not be clearer. The sacred cattle must not be touched. Odysseus warns his crew. A contrary wind traps the men on shore for a long time, and their supplies run out. While Odysseus withdraws to pray and falls asleep, Eurylochus persuades the others to slaughter the cattle. They know the prohibition and break it deliberately. It is difficult to defend the companions here. Hunger explains the decision, but it does not erase it. At the very beginning of the Odyssey, the poem itself emphasizes that the men died through their own recklessness after eating the cattle of Helios. Zeus destroys the ship, and Odysseus alone survives. The simple version has now fallen apart. Odysseus does not deliberately lead his men to their deaths. He repeatedly saves them, warns them, and chooses the lesser evil. His companions display greed, disobey orders, and take actions whose consequences they understand. The gods add to human error a force that mortals cannot oppose on equal terms. But complete absolution does not work either. Odysseus enters Polyphemus's cave without necessity. He reveals his name out of vanity. He develops a habit of concealing important information. He does not warn his men about Scylla. Too often, his personal caution saves him without becoming safety for the crew as a whole. He did not kill his companions with his own hands. Yet a good leader is responsible for more than what he intended. He is responsible for foreseeable consequences, for the quality of his orders, for the trust of his men, and for the risks to which he exposes them. Odysseus proved to be a great master of personal survival. But there is an enormous difference between a man who knows how to survive and a man who knows how to keep others alive. His entire journey unfolds inside that difference. After the death of his companions, the question of Odysseus's selfishness becomes even sharper. And here Penelope inevitably appears, the woman who waits 20 years for her husband while he lives on the islands of Circe and Calypso. At first glance, the conclusion seems obvious. Odysseus demands absolute fidelity from his wife, yet does not bind himself by the same rules. But here in particular, a modern formula may be too simple. In the three main episodes involving Circe, Calypso, and Nausicaa, Odysseus possesses very different degrees of freedom. If we reduce them all to ordinary adultery, we will lose an important part of their meaning. The encounter with Circe begins not with seduction, but with a threat. The sorceress turns Odysseus's companions into pigs and attempts to deprive him of his will with a potion. Hermes has already given the hero a means of protection. When the magic fails, Odysseus draws his sword and forces Circe to swear that she will not harm him. Only then does he share her bed. Coercion is present at the beginning of this story, and that cannot be forgotten. But then the situation changes. Circe restores his companions to human form, welcomes the travelers, and gives them safety. Odysseus remains with her for a full year. He is no longer held prisoner, and it is the crew who must remind him about returning home. The defense that he had no choice works only for the first stage of the encounter. What follows appears voluntary, at least to a significant degree. Odysseus does not abandon Ithaca forever, but he allows his purpose to recede before comfort. This does not destroy his love for Penelope, but it makes that love considerably less flawless. With Calypso, everything is different. By the time the action of the Odyssey moves toward his return, the hero has already spent many years on the nymph's island. She wants to make him her husband, and even offers him immortality. To any ordinary mortal, this would sound like an unimaginable reward. Eternal life beside a beautiful goddess, far from war, old age, and death. Odysseus refuses. More than that, the narrative shows him not enjoying a new life, but sitting on the shore and staring out to sea. He weeps and longs for home. At night he lies beside Calypso because she desires it, not because he does. He cannot leave on his own. He has no ship, no crew, and no permission from the mistress of the island. He is freed only after the gods intervene, and Hermes delivers an order commanding Calypso to release her captive. Applying the simple word adultery to this episode would be inaccurate. In precise modern language, we should speak of the absence of meaningful consent. Calypso possesses power that Odysseus cannot resist. The beauty of the island and the immortality she offers him do not change the fact that he is being held there. Calypso herself, however, delivers an important speech. She accuses the gods of a double standard. Male gods freely enter relationships with mortal women, but as soon as a goddess chooses a mortal man, the Olympians object. Within the world of the poem, her complaint is justified. Yet the justice of her complaint against the gods does not transform Odysseus's lack of freedom into a voluntary union. The story of Nausicaa presents a third situation. The young princess finds the shipwrecked Odysseus on the shore of the Phaeacian land. She helps him, gives him clothes, and explains how to reach the palace. Her father later raises the possibility of marriage. A path to a new life effectively opens before Odysseus. A wealthy household, a royal family, safety, and a woman who treats him with respect. But Odysseus does not take that opportunity. He is grateful to Nausicaa, careful of her reputation, and continues pursuing his return. No one forces him to choose Ithaca here. The possibility of beginning again exists, and he consciously rejects it. These three women reveal Odysseus more accurately than any general accusation. With Circe, he yields to the comfort that delays him. With Calypso, he is a prisoner. Before Nausicaa, he keeps his distance and chooses home. His conduct is inconsistent because the circumstances are not the same. But now, let us look at Penelope. While Odysseus is given room for adventures, relationships, and temporary departures from his goal, her fidelity must remain absolute. The suitors demand that she choose a new husband. Penelope's position is dangerous. No one knows whether Odysseus is alive. The household is being consumed. Telemachus is threatened, and refusing to choose forever is impossible. She saves herself with the very weapon that made her husband famous: cunning. By day, she weaves a funeral shroud for Laertes. By night, she unravels her work, postponing the marriage. Penelope proves worthy of Odysseus precisely because she too can create a false picture and manipulate time. But society grants the spouses different freedoms. She must preserve not only the household and the memory of her husband, but also sexual exclusivity. Odysseus's fidelity is judged differently. What matters is that he did not replace Ithaca with another kingdom and ultimately returned. This is the double standard. It is neither hidden nor accidental. It is built into the social order of the epic. A man may enter relationships outside marriage and still be considered loyal to his household. The same behavior by a woman would destroy her reputation and cast doubt on legitimate inheritance. Historical context explains this difference, but does not make it equality. We cannot demand modern norms from an ancient text. It is equally wrong to pretend that no inequality exists within it. At the same time, Odysseus's love for Penelope is not necessarily false. He rejects immortality in order to return to a mortal woman who has aged during his absence. He chooses not eternal youth, but his real home. This is a powerful decision, and there is no reason to diminish it. But sincere love does not guarantee justice. A person can truly love someone while making use of freedoms he would never agree to grant the person he loves. He can remain faithful to the ultimate goal while violating the standards by which he measures another person's fidelity. Odysseus does return to Penelope, yet the epic grants him a long journey full of detours while prescribing that she wait without moving. Before admiring the restoration of their union, we must examine how Odysseus intends to reclaim his household and what punishment he will impose on those he declares disloyal. When Odysseus finally sets foot on Ithaca, his wandering is practically over. There is no more sea, no more Cyclopes, and no more islands from which escape is impossible. He has returned to his own kingdom and regained the ability to choose. What follows is therefore much harder to explain as a necessity of survival. Athena changes his appearance, turning the king into an old beggar. Behind this disguise, Odysseus enters his household and begins to observe. He does not rush to reveal himself, even to those closest to him. He needs to discover who has remained loyal, who has joined the suitors, and who can be trusted with weapons. The plan makes political sense. Odysseus has been absent for 20 years. He is believed dead, the palace is occupied, and some of the servants are traitors. If he names himself immediately, he may be killed before he can restore his authority. The disguise is not a whim, it is a means of reconnaissance. The results of that reconnaissance leave no doubt. The suitors are not innocent men whom a jealous husband has found near his wife. For years, they have lived in Odysseus's palace, slaughtered his livestock, drunk his wine, and consumed Telemachus's inheritance. They demand that Penelope choose one of them, yet refuse to return to their own homes and seek marriage in the proper way. In the Homeric world, this is a grave violation of hospitality. A host is obliged to receive, feed, and protect a guest. In return, a guest has no right to turn another person's hospitality into endless plunder. The suitors are destroying the very order that should bind the household, society, and the gods together. Their guilt does not end there. They humiliate the disguised Odysseus, throw objects at him, threaten the servants, and discuss murdering Telemachus. This is no longer a matter of wastefulness alone. We are looking at a group of claimants prepared to eliminate the legitimate heir and divide power among themselves. Penelope announces a contest. Her hand will go to the man who can string Odysseus's bow and send an arrow through the openings in a row of axe heads. One by one, the suitors fail. Then the beggar asks for the bow. By this point, the trap is ready. Loyal servants have locked the doors. The women have been removed from the hall, and the suitors' weapons have been taken away. Odysseus strings the bow without visible effort, strikes the target, and then sends his next arrow into Antinous, one of the chief instigators. This is not an outburst of rage. It is not a sudden brawl or an act of self-defense that arose without warning. Odysseus assigned roles in advance, sealed the exits, and deprived his opponents of weapons. What we are witnessing is a carefully planned extermination. After Antinous, Eurymachus is the first to attempt negotiation. He places all the blame on the dead leader and promises to compensate Odysseus for his losses. The offer may be insincere. Eurymachus understands that he is trapped. Still, it is an opportunity to stop the fighting and demand restitution. Odysseus rejects it. He declares that the suitors will not escape even if they surrender all their wealth. From the hero's point of view, the debt can no longer be paid with livestock and gold. The offense was directed at his household, wife, son, name, and royal dignity. In heroic ethics, such an injury demands blood. Yet this is precisely where Odysseus becomes accuser, judge, and executioner at once. No one examines each man's degree of guilt. Simply being present in the hall effectively becomes a death sentence. The slaughter is not entirely indiscriminate. The bard Phemius begs for mercy and says that he served the suitors under compulsion. Telemachus confirms his account, and Odysseus spares him. The herald Medon also survives. The hero is therefore capable of distinguishing different degrees of involvement and chooses not to kill those he considers innocent. That is exactly why the fate of the others appears even harsher. Odysseus has not lost his mind and is not acting in a state of uncontrollable fury. He understands what he is doing. His mercy exists, but it is granted only by the victor's personal decision. After the suitors are dead, the punishment continues. The maidservants, judged disloyal to the household and accused of relations with the occupiers, are forced to carry out the bodies and clean the hall. Telemachus then orders them hanged. The text describes their deaths without sentimentality, but the scene itself leaves a heavy impression. We are given no separate inquiry into each woman's conduct. The extent to which their relations with the men controlling the palace were voluntary is barely discussed. The punishment of the goatherd Melanthius is more terrible still. He openly supported the suitors, insulted Odysseus, and attempted to bring the enemy weapons during the battle. His betrayal is proven by his actions. But after the victory, he is not simply killed. He is subjected to agonizing mutilation and dismemberment. Here, punishment goes far beyond the removal of a threat. We can say that this is not a modern courtroom, but a world of blood vengeance and restored authority. That is true. Odysseus is not returning to a state with police, independent judges, and an established legal procedure. His household and kingdom have been seized, and his enemies intended to murder his son. If he leaves the leading suitors alive, the struggle will almost certainly continue. The political logic of the slaughter is understandable. Power that has been absent for 20 years must be restored quickly and decisively. But understanding the mechanism does not make it morally pure. The need to defeat armed opponents does not explain the torture of a man who has already been neutralized. The guilt of some maidservants does not prove the justice of collective punishment. Being right in the central conflict does not grant permission for unlimited cruelty. And the epic seems to acknowledge that slaughter alone cannot restore order. The relatives of the dead take up arms. A new chain of vengeance begins, with each side believing it has the right to answer blood with blood. Odysseus cannot stop it. The intervention of Athena and the will of Zeus are required. The result is uncomfortable. The suitors truly did consume the household, violate hospitality, and plot the murder of Telemachus. Odysseus had grounds to reclaim his authority and protect his family. Yet individual details of his vengeance cannot be completely justified, even by the logic of restoring order. The hero reclaims his household. The victor punishes the guilty. The king takes his place again. And still, in the cleansed palace, a question remains. Where did justice end and the enjoyment of unlimited power begin? We must now carry that question into the final judgment of Odysseus. We now have enough evidence to pass judgment on Odysseus, yet this is precisely the moment when it becomes clear why a single word will not be enough. To call him a hero conceals too much. To call him a villain ignores what he genuinely accomplished. Let us begin with the prosecution. Odysseus exposed his companions to risks that were not always necessary. He entered Polyphemus's cave against the crew's sensible advice. After escaping, he revealed his name even though they begged him to remain silent. Before meeting Scylla, he knew that some of his men would die, but did not warn them. Even when his decisions had a practical justification, he reserved for himself the right to decide alone what price everyone else would pay. These are not random mistakes made by an inexperienced man. Odysseus is better at predicting the actions of others than almost any character in the epic. For that very reason, a higher standard of responsibility applies to him. The more accurately a person understands the consequences, the harder it is to excuse him by saying, "He could not have known." The second charge is lying. Odysseus deceives enemies, allies, servants, and loved ones. Often it is necessary. But gradually, caution becomes a habit of never revealing the whole picture to anyone. Even loyalty is something he prefers to test from the shadows. Trust is not enough for him. He demands proof obtained under conditions he alone controls. Such caution saves a king who has been absent from home for 20 years. At the same time, it reveals profound distrust. Odysseus does not simply return to people, he puts them on trial without telling them that judgment has already begun. The third charge is vanity. In the heroic world, the desire for glory is natural, but the episode with Polyphemus reveals its destructive form. Odysseus has already won. The ship is moving away, his men are safe, and his enemy is blind. All that is required is silence. But an anonymous victory is not enough for him. The hero prefers danger to being forgotten. The fourth charge concerns his household. Penelope is required to maintain unconditional fidelity, while Odysseus himself enjoys far greater freedom. Not every relationship he enters is voluntary, and it would be especially unjust to blame him for the years spent with Calypso. But his relationship with Circe cannot be explained entirely by coercion. The hero, therefore, remains faithful to his goal without observing the form of fidelity that his society demands from his wife. Finally, there is the violence after his return. The suitors are guilty. They consumed his household, violated hospitality, and plotted the murder of Telemachus. Odysseus had grounds to use force, but the torture of Melanthius and the execution of the maidservants show how quickly the restoration of justice becomes a display of unlimited authority. The victor determines guilt, imposes punishment, and carries it out himself. The case for the prosecution is severe. Now let us hear the defense. Odysseus lives in a world where a person can die because of a storm, a god's whim, or an encounter with a creature to whom human rules mean nothing. He faces a Cyclops, a sorceress, the Sirens, Scylla, Charybdis, and the wrath of Poseidon. To demand that he remain open and flawlessly honest under such conditions is to demand that he die conveniently. His cunning saves more than his own life. In the cave of Polyphemus, Odysseus finds a way out when physical strength is useless. He frees the companions Circe has transformed. He warns the crew not to touch the cattle of Helios. He tries to restrain his men from dangerous decisions, though they do not always listen. Some tragedies occur not because of his orders, but in defiance of them. The way Odysseus endures humiliation also matters. Achilles answers insult with rage and withdraws from the war, knowing that his comrades will die. Odysseus knows how to endure. Back on Ithaca, he restrains himself while being insulted in his own home. He waits, observes, and strikes only after preparing. This may look like cold calculation, but without such self-control, he could not have restored his authority or protected his family. Finally, Odysseus does not abandon his home. Calypso offers him something no mortal can obtain: eternal life beside a goddess. He chooses aging, the dangerous sea, and a return to mortal Penelope. However we judge his other actions, this decision cannot be reduced to personal advantage. Ithaca is small, the palace has been plundered, and the future is uncertain. Nevertheless, it is there that he wants to return. The defense can add one more argument. Odysseus never pretends to be a peaceful man. He is a warrior and king of the heroic age. His task is not to conform to our idea of a good husband, a humane commander, or a just ruler. He must survive, reclaim his home, punish his enemies, and preserve his name. By the standards of his own world, he succeeds. But an important qualification must be added to both prosecution and defense. We are not reading a record of events. We are reading an epic constructed to direct our sympathies. The suitors are presented as violators of order, Penelope as a faithful wife, and Odysseus's return as the restoration of justice. The narrative itself goes a long way toward defending its hero. Moreover, we hear the stories of the Cyclopes, the Laestrygonians, Circe, Scylla, and the underworld from Odysseus himself while he is among the Phaeacians. He is not merely a participant in the events, but the narrator of his own story. Before him sit hospitable hosts, upon whom his return depends. He therefore has a reason to present himself as courageous, long-suffering, and worthy of help. This makes it possible to discuss Odysseus as a potentially unreliable narrator, a character whose version of events may be incomplete or shaped to benefit him. But possibility is not proof. The text never tells us that Odysseus invented his adventures. Some events are supported by the overall logic of the poem and by the intervention of the gods. Declaring the entire account a lie would therefore be as simplistic as accepting every self-justification without question. Odysseus's real problem lies deeper than any individual charge. His virtues and faults cannot be separated into different sides of his character. Intelligence saves him, but also allows him to manipulate others. Caution helps him survive, but destroys trust. Self-control prevents a premature strike, but makes his revenge cold and calculated. Love of home gives him the strength to reject immortality, yet also excuses the price that others pay for his return. Courage carries him through danger, and the same courage, mixed with vanity, creates a new threat after victory has already been won. The verdict will therefore be uncomfortable. Odysseus is a liar, but not every lie he tells is criminal. He is selfish, but not indifferent to his family or companions. He is cruel, but he acts in a cruel world against people who were themselves preparing violence. He is an effective ruler, yet he too often treats effectiveness as sufficient justification for whatever he decides. He is not a hero despite these contradictions. In ancient epic, he becomes a hero because of qualities that trouble us today. He knows how to win, survive, recover what was lost, and force reality to conform to his design. But the word hero here describes the scale of a person and his ability to reach a goal. It is not a certificate of moral perfection. One final question remains. Why did culture continue to admire Odysseus for centuries while seeing perfectly well everything that made him dangerous? After everything we have said, the phrase, "he was forgiven for everything," no longer sounds quite accurate. Odysseus has never been viewed in only one way. He has been admired, condemned, transformed into a wise wanderer, and recast as a dangerous deceiver. Yet he truly did preserve his place among the great figures of culture. This did not happen because readers failed to notice his cruelty. First of all, Odysseus belongs to the winning side. Troy did not fall because of one man alone, but tradition associates him with the plan that ended the war. 10 years of direct force achieved nothing. Cunning solved the problem. Culture remembers the person who accomplished the impossible, even when the means of victory remain questionable. Odysseus also represents a particular kind of hero. He is not the strongest warrior or a demigod who destroys enemies with a single blow. He makes mistakes, suffers defeat, finds himself naked on an unfamiliar shore, asks for help, and is forced to conceal his name. His superiority appears not in invulnerability, but in his ability to pull himself together after yet another catastrophe. Such a hero is easier to identify with. Most people do not recognize themselves in Achilles charging into battle with almost supernatural strength. But fear, exhaustion, homesickness, and the need to find a way out of a desperate situation are familiar to everyone. The return home itself becomes the chief mechanism through which Odysseus is justified. The audience follows him not because it approves of every act, but because it understands his ultimate goal. Ithaca becomes the point toward which the entire story converges. As long as the hero is trying to reach home, his mistakes appear as obstacles along the way rather than the final definition of his character. Narrative perspective also plays a role. Odysseus tells much of the journey himself. We see the monsters through his eyes, learn of losses through his version of events, feel his fear, and hear his explanations. The companions who die along the way are given almost no voice of their own. They never have the opportunity to describe what kind of leader Odysseus was from their point of view. This is how heroic narrative works. The central character's goal remains constantly before us, while the price paid by supporting characters quickly falls behind. Odysseus's opponents also help his reputation. Polyphemus devours human beings. The suitors consume the household and plan to murder Telemachus. The disloyal servants support those who have occupied the palace. Against them, the hero's cruelty appears to be a response to an order that has already been violated. Finally, the story ends not with a list of the dead, but with the restoration of Ithaca. Odysseus recovers his name, his wife, his son, and his authority. Athena ends the blood feud. The final point is placed where the world has been put back together, not where its human cost has been counted. A victorious ending inevitably changes how we perceive the entire journey. Beyond the Greek tradition, however, the character quickly becomes less comfortable. In Roman epic, Ulysses, the Roman name for Odysseus, often appears as the Trojans' treacherous enemy. For Virgil, he is associated with the deception that destroyed the city. Dante places him among the fraudulent counselors. Intelligence that recognizes no moral limits leads the hero to destruction. In later European culture, Odysseus changes again. He becomes a symbol of the irresistible desire for knowledge, of endless travel, and of the human mind that refuses to stop. In Joyce, his journey is transferred into everyday life. An ancient voyage is reflected in a single day in the life of an ordinary man. Every age chooses its own Odysseus. A military culture sees a victor. A moral culture sees a deceiver. The age of exploration sees a wanderer. Modern literature sees a complex human being in whom greatness stands beside pettiness. So Odysseus was not forgiven for everything. Something more interesting happened. Nothing about him was forgotten. His contradictions did not destroy the character. They made him enduring. A flawless hero soon becomes a monument. We continue to argue about Odysseus because he has never allowed a final full stop to be placed beside his name. And yet, one last question remains. Do we have the right to judge Odysseus by the rules of a world that emerged almost 3,000 years after his poem? Such judgment can indeed become an anachronism, the projection of modern assumptions onto an age governed by different norms. Homeric society did not know equality in today's sense, possessed no modern judicial system, and understood war, vengeance, marriage, and power differently. The honor of a family could matter more than an individual life, and a bloody slaughter could be regarded as the lawful restoration of a violated order. If we forget this, Odysseus becomes a convenient villain, guilty above all of not being our contemporary. But there is an opposite error as well, saying, "Those were different times," and using that phrase to excuse every cruelty. Historical context explains an action. It shows why a person acted as he did, and why those around him might have believed he was right. But explanation is not the same as justification. When reading an ancient text, it is therefore useful to separate three different questions every time. What was considered acceptable within the world of the epic? How does the narrative itself treat the act? And finally, what do we see in it from the perspective of our own age? The answers do not have to agree. The slaughter of the suitors fits the logic of restoring authority. The epic as a whole stands on Odysseus's side, but a modern viewer has reason to see excessive cruelty in the fate of the maidservants and Melanthius. This is not arrogance toward the past, provided that we understand the difference between eras and do not present our judgment as the only possible one. The same applies to deception, fidelity, and responsibility for the companions. Ancient tradition admires Odysseus's intelligence. We can share that admiration while also noticing that his intelligence often deprives others of the right to choose. One observation does not cancel the other. Perhaps this is precisely why the Odyssey has survived for centuries. It does not offer a hero suitable for simple imitation. Odysseus can endure, think, return after defeat, and refuse to abandon his home. Yet those same qualities make him suspicious, controlling, and at times merciless. He matters not because he teaches us to be good. He reveals a more uncomfortable truth. Intelligence does not guarantee honesty. Endurance does not guarantee justice. Love of home does not exclude selfishness. And the ability to survive does not mean the ability to preserve those who walk beside you. The ancients called Odysseus a hero, but to them, a hero was not a saint. Perhaps they understood this contradiction better than we think. The final verdict, therefore, remains complex. We can admire Odysseus without excusing him, and condemn him without denying his greatness.